Over communicate, period. Most people think they communicate so well when in reality they just don't. A lot of people think they communicated something and like everyone understood it. A classic example I would give of in a group of 30 people, like if I tell them like, hey everyone, the sky is blue, one person would be like, you said green, right? I'd be like, no, blue. They're like, I think I heard green. And they would walk away to green. You're like, what the hell? So like if you're communicating to a mass of people, I promise you not all of them understood. And if you communicate to like an individual, it almost never hurts to like clarify communication. I don't think it's bad to over communicate, and then once you kind of feel your groove, you can back off some.
Hello, friends. I'm Norman Driggers, and you're listening to Your Finest Hour. This is a show where we explore pivotal moments that define our own personal journey. This podcast gets its name from Winston Churchill's famous quote about what a shame to be unprepared for what could have been your finest hour. Through candid conversations with guests who have faced their defining moments, we'll uncover some lessons in self-leadership that can help you prepare for yours. In each episode, we follow a simple but powerful framework where we recount the experience, reflect on lessons learned, and share recommendations you can apply to your own journey. Whether you're just starting out or looking to reach new heights, this podcast is for you. If you find value in these conversations, I'd be incredibly grateful if you'd share this podcast with others who may benefit from it. Your support in spreading the word helps the reach. And the more our community grows, the more resources I can invest in making the show an even better experience for you, the audience. Every little bit helps, and I'm greatly appreciative for it. So without further ado, the episode. What does it really mean to find balance? Is it some perfect 50-50 split between work and life? Or is it something deeper? A conversation about priorities, communication, and alignment with the people we love. Welcome to Your Finest Hour, where we unpack the pivotal moments that define us. I'm your host, and today we're talking about something that affects all of us. The tug of war between our professional obligations and our personal lives. My guest today knows this struggle intimately. He served as an ESOS commander in the military and experienced what most would consider the ultimate work-life imbalance, being deployed for 8 months out of a single year. What makes his story powerful isn't just the challenge itself, but the perspective he gained through it. The question at the heart of today's episode is one we all face. How do we communicate with our partners when life demands an uneven distribution of our time and energy, and what happens when we don't? Joined with me today is a good friend, Montana Puckett. Hello, Montana. Tweeter.
How you doing, Rufio?
What's up, man? Welcome to the episode. How are you doing today?
Dude, I am awesome. I get to get paid for the Air Force and not have to work for about 12 weeks because I just had my first kid. He's 5 weeks old. And so I'm just getting a lot of time with the family, which is awesome.
What is it like being a new dad, dude?
Dude, it is awesome. Like I'm sure it's different for everybody. We've been really blessed. Through the pregnancy, we had some issues with Kentucky's his name. So Kentucky, where he had a lung in his mass. And then about a month before he was born, that went away, which is awesome. He's born. Scan still shows it's gone. So like a huge blessing for us. And he's just a chill kid. Like I think going throughout life, we generally hear the bad stories from people because that's what they want to tell about like how being a new parent's hard and you'll never sleep and like all these things. We're pretty fortunate. He's sleeping like 5 to 6 hours a night at a time right now at 5 weeks old, which is a huge blessing. And then like throughout the day, he's just a chill kid. If he's not like hungry, or has like gas, he generally is just chill, which is awesome. That being said, I don't have to do as much work. Kayla's doing the majority of it. Like she wakes up with him in the middle of the night and that kind of stuff. So she's making the sacrifice. And then my job is just to take care of her. It's just pretty cool right now that the Air Force is paying me money to take care of my wife and kid. And that's it. And that's like the first time that's ever happened. So it's awesome.
Yeah, that is awesome. How long have you been in the Air Force?
I've been in the Air Force. Let me do some math real quick. It'll be 12 years in November.
So I asked Brad this question in his episode, and I actually got this from Hitch. So Hitch asked Squid, what was his reason for joining, and what was the reason that kept him in? Do you have any thoughts on why you joined why you're still in.
Yeah, so the reason I joined, like, I grew up in the GWAT area, or 9/11, that type of stuff, right? So I had some sense of like to serve and those type of things. Generally, the military was viewed as like a positive experience, or like that was my perception, right? Um, Really, like how it all ended up though is I was in Boy Scouts, and in Boy Scouts, one of my very good friends there, got like close to his family, the Stanleys, and his parents both were prior military. Um, and Mr. Stanley, as we get to like the end of our junior year and senior year, he's asking me like, what are you gonna do? And I was like, I don't know. I'm somewhere between moving down to South Carolina and like working construction, and living with my dad, or like going to college, um, that type of deal. And he's like, well, are you applying to the academies? To like West Point one. I was like, hadn't planned on it. And he's like, well, you are now. And basically like highly encouraged me to apply to the academies. His son was already applying. He's like, yeah, my son's already doing it. You should do it. At that point, I thought I was probably applying to go do ROTC with the Air Force. And he's like, why wouldn't you? It's basically the same process, a little different. I was like, okay, and like to the point where I would be over at his house and he would proofread my essays that were being submitted to the Air Force Academy in West Point, um, that kind of stuff. So had a huge influence, for someone just like to push me to go do these things. Um, ROTC was kind of more something I thought I would be able to do, just due to the life situation. My mom had ALS at the time and some different things like that. Also, I didn't think I was like good enough to go to the academies, which later they told me I wasn't, so that worked out. But I was like real close to not going to college at all, and it just happened to be that I applied. I ended up getting a scholarship for Air Force ROTC, and like that set me on my path. I don't know if I got a scholarship if I went to college, because like we didn't have money to go to college. I would had to have taken out a bunch of student loans and all that kind of stuff, and I just never had to get to that point to make that decision. But I don't know what decision I would have made.
Yeah, where are you originally from?
Originally, I was born in Tennessee, but my high school years and middle school and stuff was in Missouri, Lake of the Ozarks. And then, so then my school I ended up going to was about an hour and a half away in Rolla, Missouri, engineering school there.
Now, for the people that don't know you that are listening,
Yep.
Tweeter, which is his call sign, first name Montana, Tweeter is like the textbook extrovert. Now, Tweeter, just recently we went out to a bar, there was line dancing, and Tweeter almost immediately was like, man, I love this shit. He was like, I could do this like all the time. Um, and it's really awesome like seeing him in his element, just like being around people, because he will talk to anyone and they will always be left with a great experience there. And so my question is, someone who, me personally, I grew up as an extrovert, but as I've gotten maybe older or just like more settled into just like my current life or whatever, I'm like, you know what? I enjoy talking to people, but I enjoy talking to people from my home. We're like, you're like, let's go here, let's go do this thing, like let's go meet people, like do the whole thing. Where do you think that comes from?
Where does that come from? I mean, partially it probably comes from so my parents got divorced when I was 7-ish years old. We were living out in Alabama at the time, and we lived there for a couple of years. Like parents were in separate houses, and then my mom and us moved up to Missouri, where she was from, and then my dad kind of wandered around the South, did different jobs, as he progressed through his career, from Atlanta, Georgia, to Columbia, South Carolina, then Charleston, South Carolina. And when I was home with my mom, like we pretty much were at the house, um, unless I was like, doing whatever sport or whatever kind of stuff. But when I would go with my dad, because it was like 8 weeks in the summer, and like Christmas or whatever, those 8 weeks, I was like with my dad for 8 weeks, to include like he would go into work and I would go into work with him. And I would just be like hanging out in the office for 12 hours that day with my dad. Like he'd be working, and like I would go find a closet and like read a Lewis L'Amour book, or I would go wander around the like warehouse, or like do whatever. Go talk to like the random people, or people come by and talk to me because I'm this 12-year-old kid hanging out with my dad every day for 2 months straight. So like obviously they all knew me and that kind of stuff. I assume to a certain extent that has to do with it. My dad's an extrovert. I'm a lot like my dad. And so probably just seeing him, like how he interacted with people and all that type of stuff. I assume that's part of it. And then, when I got to college and I had a lot more freedom, where it's like now you're on this campus with thousands of other people and like the access to be an extrovert is just endless. That was really easy for me just to be like new people and have a great time.
Yeah, that's funny. What was college like?
So I went to Missouri University of Science and Technology. It's an engineering school in Missouri. Um, I think when I went there, they had like 18 degrees and 19 of them, I'm sorry, 18 degrees and 15 of them were either engineering or science based, like physics or chemistry or something like that. So all that to say is heavy, heavy engineering school. Um, as you can expect, at least back in 2010, the ratio was like 5 guys to 1 girl, that type of stuff. Like a lot of people played D&D and all those things. A lot of engineers. But I lived on the dorms my first year. I was fortunate enough to be put in the dorms on what we called 4 North, which is the North building on the 4th floor. And it was like a little community. It was awesome. They had parties and all sorts of stuff. There was always something going on, right? Like if you wanted to like be around people, there's something going on you could. If you just want to lock yourself in your room, that's great. Like my sophomore year, we put up bunk beds and did like theater seating in our room and had a system and people come by and play with us and all that kind of stuff. So that experience was great. And then my last couple of years, I moved out to my own house with buddies and that kind of stuff. And I had like 2 distinct groups throughout my college where I had my ROTC like group of friends where we were all, you know, striving to be in the Air Force and all that kind of stuff. And then I had like all my what I would call 4 North group of friends, which were random college people that had like lived on this floor at some point and then were scattered around the town. Rella is really small, so it's not like in a big city. So everything was within a 5-minute drive in the town. So it was like super easy just to connect with different people or go to whatever house party or that kind of stuff. It was awesome.
What was partying like as an ROTC? I don't remember if Pistol did ROTC. I don't remember how he joined the Air Force.
I think he did. Yes, he did because he got some like bullshit photography degree or something.
Zap. Yeah, so like obviously Pistol's not the type to like go out every weekend and like, doing keg stands and stuff like that. Were you like that in college, like with ROTC and stuff?
No, so I was on a scholarship in ROTC, and basically with that, the Air Force was paying for my college, which was huge for me. With that, it turns out if you get in any trouble, like legal trouble, you get a minor in possession or DUI or any of that kind of stuff, they generally would strip your scholarship and you'd be kicked out, right? Which I wasn't messing around with that kind of shit. So I didn't really drink in college until I was 21. Now, once I turned 21 and like my last 2 years there, I drank considerably more. I ended up being a bartender, all that kind of stuff. But before that, I just didn't really drink. I would on 4 North every Thursday. They have Thursday night pong, and like every day of the week there was something to go do. And I would just go there with my friends, and I just wouldn't drink, which
Yeah.
at that time like wasn't a big deal to me. I mean, I saw other guys that I was in ROTC with get like a minor in possession, and then they weren't in the Air Force anymore. And guys get DUIs, and then like weren't in the Air Force anymore. And this was like before Uber really existed, especially in Rolla, Missouri, where like now it's really easy to like go out and drink and just get Ubered home, no big deal. But back then it just wasn't as easy and just not stuff I was messing around with and just played it safe. And then once I got to 21, I drank
Yeah.
considerably more.
That's cool, dude.
But yeah, it
Are you
was
a ping pong
an
player?
awesome experience. Ping pong or like Forrest Gump ping pong? No.
Yeah, did you say there was like pong night on Thursdays?
Like beer pong.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking you're saying like ping
No.
pong and stuff like that.
No,
Are you
every
good?
Thursday they would have. I mean, when I was in college, I did all right, but I don't like play beer pong too often anymore.
I can just imagine you and Tiva teaming up and playing beer pong the night away, dude.
I'm down to do it. It's part of that, extrovert experience. You go out and meet new people and talk shit and all the things.
Yeah. So can you kind of explain civil engineering because I hear that a lot of engineers will make the joke that civil engineering is not like the rest of them, but I know
Yeah,
nothing
sure.
about any engineering degrees
No, dude,
whatsoever.
that's good. So civil engineering, generally speaking, out of all the engineering, is the simplest. It is like basic engineering principles. It's not near as complicated as like electrical engineering or aerospace engineering, that type of stuff. I actually started as a mechanical engineer until I think it was my first semester junior year. I got into a class called thermodynamics. It was very difficult. My instructor, I would say it's generous to say they spoke English, and it didn't go well. I just like halfway through class, I was like, this is not what I want to do at all. And then my buddy, who is still in the Air Force, he actually got picked up for the OMSA program recently. He was like, dude, you should come to civil engineering. I'm a civil engineer. It's awesome. You don't have to do that stupid stuff. Here's what we do. And I was like, looked into it. And then I was like, went to switch my major because, like most degrees, or at least all the engineering, my first 2 years, we took all the same courses. Like, we took all the same physics courses and calculus and IFQ and all that kind of stuff. So to transition to civil engineering was like not a problem at all. And then I finished out as a civil engineer for the last 3 years of college. Uh, but yeah, it's super easy. It's a degree I've never used. Um, I've never done civil engineering in the Air Force or anywhere in my life. Um, a lot of like the tagline at the school or in ROTC, what they would say is like people who don't necessarily hire engineers because they can do engineering. It's because they've been taught to solve problems. And then it's effectively true. Like all my classes, I was given a problem, I had to solve it. It wasn't like what I compare to a history degree where I was given a case study, then I had to talk about a case study. Or like my master's now, it's a lot of like look at what happened and then talk about it. That's not what engineering was. It was like, uh, you have a dam, go build it, and you had to like build a dam with all the equations and all that kind of stuff to prove that it was going to do the thing, which is just a different type of uh, mindset, if you will.
Yeah. Did any of those skills help you like at all? So the question I'm getting ready to ask, like you said, like Pistol's got like a photography degree, like, you know, I have an Intel degree just from being in the military and getting my degree while I was in the military. And there's a bunch of my buddies that have just like all sorts of like different wild degrees that either helped them in their career in the Air Force or just they never see again, never touch again, never talk about.
Yeah.
Did your degrees help you at all, either as a navigator or at the weapons school? Because I heard you talk about the problem solving piece and saying that civil engineer is like not that kind of engineering degree when it comes to problem solving. And as you know, weapons school is like all problem solving.
Yeah. So, um, first I'll say it helped me in the Air Force because like the engineering degree was fucking hard. Like at one point I got a 29 on a Calc 2 test. It wasn't out of 30. Uh, like it was hard. So like just going through something that like it wasn't up until that point, like in high school, my physics class and math class in high school, like that was easy. I did all my homework during class. I didn't do homework at home because while they were like teaching it, I was just doing the assignment. That stuff was easy. Um, Not so much in my English class, but and then I got to college. Thankfully, as engineers, they didn't care much about your English, so I focused on all the math and sciences and that kind of stuff. And like some of it was just like incredibly difficult. And there were times where like I would walk into a final and be like, well, I need this score to like pass this class. Like that's a different kind of stress you got to learn to deal with and like get through and that kind of stuff. So then I got in the Air Force. I went through CISO training, which hopefully one day you'll go through, and that's just more trials and tests and evaluations and that type of stuff. And then of course WIC is was harder than engineering, um, but just like building your resilience, if you will, to like challenge a difficult thing and get through it. And then I don't know, it just taught me that like to solve problems, right? And that's just constantly what I'm trying to do, whether people like it or not, to include my wife. She doesn't always appreciate that I'm trying to solve the problem. But just solving problems is good and entertaining to me. It's just what I want to do. And the Air Force generally appreciates that I try to solve problems. Not all leaders appreciate it. That's
That's
okay.
funny because that's a perfect transition to relationship dynamics. So tell me about how we got to you becoming the ESOS commander. So you
Yeah.
go through nav school, you go through your MC 130, initial qual, or excuse me, your basic qual, which is your initial qual, and then your mission qualification. You get to the unit. What year is it?
Yeah, so I got to Mildenhall in England, which was my first operational unit in December of 15. And then I left there in the spring of 19. So I had like 3.5 years there, and it was an awesome experience. Part of the reason I went to weapons school was because at the time at Mildenhall, the people I respected had came from weapons school. And so I was just, I guess, just the natural progression. Um, Kayla also pushed me to go from the fact that I was talking about whether I'm going to do it. Weapons school is incredibly difficult and it sucks. And I was talking to her about it, and I was like, I don't know if I want to do it. She's like, why? I'm like, because it sucks. She's like, are you not going to do something because it's hard? And I was like, well, fuck you. I guess I am. Uh,
I'm a big
so then I
boy.
went to
I'm a strong boy.
yeah, I can do that. And so then I went to weapons school. I came out of weapons school, and basically I got done with weapons school in December of 19, and then 2.5 months later, COVID happened, right? Um, so I spent a bunch of time deployed during COVID, and my squadron commander, while I was at Cannon Air Force Base in New Mexico, Danger, he put me in a position where I could lead, and then gave me opportunities. I didn't realize what was happening at the time, or like the steps he was taking, necessarily, to put me in a position where I could deploy. When I deployed, I was a captain. When I deployed as a commander, I was a captain, which for our community isn't normal. It's usually majors. All that to say is someone was accepting risk for me to do that, and he set it up in a way to get my name recognized enough to get people to sign off on it. And I also had like advocates in my corner, right? I had Flip, who he was my DO, if you will, at the time, and he went to Danger at one point. He's like, "We're missing an opportunity if we don't make Montana the ESOS commander here in 9 months." And so between him putting the bug in Danger's ear, and then Danger taking steps to like make that a success, that's how that happened. There's a saying we have in the Air Force about luck and timing, 100%. Like, don't get me wrong, you have to do the work to get to the point where luck and timing matters. But if I had shown up to Cannon 6 months later, like that timeline probably wouldn't have worked. Or if I'd shown up 6 months earlier, or if Danger just wasn't my squadron commander and I had a squadron commander who wasn't willing to take a risk on a captain. So like, there's luck and timing involved.
Yeah, I do want to backtrack and talk about the weapon school stuff for a sec.
Yeah.
But as you were talking about luck and timing, which I obviously completely agree. So when I was going through WIC, Macho used to have a quote that said, uh, "Luck is when preparation and opportunity meet, and so good luck." And that has always like resonated with me. I say that all the time now because I feel like when you walk up to someone, you're like, "Hey, good luck," and they're like, "I don't need luck." I'm just like, "Okay." And then you move on. But I've always loved, like, once we get ready to step into the aircraft, I used to tell the students all the time, like, good luck. And then I would frame it that way. And you could visibly see, like, the excitement come from them because they would always say, like, I have prepped for this opportunity. And so I'm ready to, like, commit to it. But I appreciate you sharing that. What was your WIC experience like?
Oh, dude, that sucked. It was hands down the hardest 6 months of something I've chose to do. It was wild. Uh, it was easily the hardest thing I've done. It was also like where I had the most opportunity to grow though as well. Um, for those not familiar, in my class, for example, we had 3 students that we called WUGs that were MC 130 people, and I think at the time we had either 6 or 7 instructors. I don't know of another military course that has that student to instructor ratio. We almost had double the instructors for every student. So I've never received so much direct and constant feedback about everything I was doing. Um, at the time, I would say some of it wasn't needed, but it was awesome because I essentially got 6 months with people's entire job was just to make me better. And at the time, they thought the way to do that was just to like make it really hard in every way possible. I'm back instructing there now, so we do things a little different, but it's still incredibly hard. You have way too much to do and not enough time to do it. A classic example of something they would do is like they'd walk in and be like, "Hey, in 10 minutes, you're gonna give me a 5 minute instruction on X." Shit. Okay. And it's like this obscure thing that's on your aircraft that you've never touched before. So you like spend 10 minutes trying to like remember it and do whatever. And they come back 10 minutes later. And like they've done this to all three of us. And they come back 10 minutes later. And they're like, "All right, you ready?" And we're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "All right, so all of you now need to tell the person to your left what you learned in that 5 minutes. And then another 10 minutes, that person's going to brief on what you've been studying." And you're like, "Well, fuck, man." And of course you do that. And it turns out not great, blah, blah, blah. But just through that exercise, like it's practice and not having near enough time to absorb a bunch of information, and then you take it and have not near enough time to communicate information, and then you take it and you have not near enough time to absorb what someone else is telling you. So like in that first part, you're trying to absorb information from like words on paper generally, and the last part you're trying to absorb information through how someone else is talking and communicating to you. Just in like that 30-minute little drill, with those repetitions, you learn so much. And like that was just like life for 6 months where they would just do random stuff like that. And as you know, Rufio, it was not uncommon to just have to give an hour brief.
Yeah.
And like daily, you were giving hour-long briefs, which when I entered the course, I don't know if I'd ever done an hour-long brief in my life. Like, we would have briefs that were kind of pieced together on different briefs over 3 hours, but never like, "Hey, you're the only one person talking for the next 60 to 90 minutes, and we're going to do everything tonight based on what you say."
Yeah, literally everything. Even if
Everything.
It's wrong, we're doing it.
And then tomorrow, we're going to spend 2 hours telling you how you did all that wrong. Like, sounds awesome.
Dude, to your point too, the level of instruction, the level of detail that comes with instruction is just like prior to getting to the school, you just have no concept. You're like, of course I'm a great instructor. That's why, either I get selected or that's why, I'm getting selected for other positions and stuff like that. But I remember in the first 2 weeks when I showed up, I think it was Foley. And so congrats to Foley on his new selection and assignment. But I'm almost positive it was Foley. He looked at me and he's like, "Hey man, you just gotta know how to teach stuff, dude." And I was like, "What does that mean, Foley?" And he's like, "Teach me how to tie my shoe." And I bent down and looked at my shoe and I was like, "Well, I know how to tie my shoe, but I don't know how to explain how to tie, my shoe, And so I was sitting there thinking like, how do you explain something to your point? Like you've been sitting in your career position for 10 years, and you're just like, "Oh, well, you just press the buttons. What do you mean?" And then someone who has never done your job before sits the seat and you have to coach them through like how to do your job just so you can see how to teach. And it's the craziest experience. But then again, to your earlier point, like once you get to the end of it, you're like, "I could teach a fish how to fly, dude." You're like, "I can teach anybody anything."
It's like hands down the most humbling experience I've ever been through, right? Because you can ask Kayla. I'm generally very confident, what some people will call cocky, and like I know my abilities and I play towards my strengths and I try
Yep.
to downplay my weaknesses, right? So it's just like an incredibly humbling experience for 6 months for people just to tell you all the things you could do better and be like, "We expect it to be better tomorrow." So it was amazing for that. And to clarify, I didn't have like an easy time through WIC. I barely made it through. For those in the Air Force, we have to have mess dress for graduation. I waited till the last possible minute to buy it because I was like, I'm not wasting hundreds of dollars for this mess dress I'm not gonna wear. I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't do it again, but like hands down had like probably the biggest effect on my career and where I choose to spend my time.
You feel like that prepared you, like weapon school, you feel like it prepared you to be an ESOS commander? Because you went through the course, graduated, went to the unit with Danger as your commander, and then you were saying Flip selected you, or excuse me, not selected you, but Flip like advocated for you. This was post weapon school.
Post web school, yeah.
Yeah. You feel like weapon school prepared you at all for that assignment then?
Yeah, so a common thing you'll hear at weapon school is that weapon school is a leadership course disguised with tactics. It's a common thing, and it's not like the leadership we generally think of. It's not like here's 100 dudes and dudettes, go do something with them. It's that learning how to like for instance, if you and me are we together, how do I lead you for the next 24 hours? How do I lead then the crew of 5 or 6 of us just for this next 4 hours? And then how do I lead this entire air package, which is like 100 and something people through the next day and a half? So it's just a different type of leadership. You learn a lot about like how you communicate or how you need to change how you communicate depending on who your audience is and those type of things. So yeah, I think it prepared me to a certain extent. It didn't prepare me for that exact situation, but it gave me a lot of skills that I could take forward. And I recognize as well, if I hadn't gone through weapon school and become a patch, I probably wouldn't have had people advocating and trusting me the way they did. Like a certain amount of respect, if you will, comes from just having the patch. So part of the reason Flip was okay advocating for me is because he was like, hey, we have a patch. Like, when are you going to have this opportunity again? Part of being the ESOS commander is like making tactical decisions, and that's a lot what we do in WIC. So I don't think if I hadn't gone to weapon school, I would have had that opportunity.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So at this point, then you find out that you're selected as the ESOS commander. When does the friction with Kayla come into play?
It kind of builds. So the way I'll describe it is Kayla's been through a lot of she's made a lot of sacrifices for me. A couple examples of that is when after Pensacola, Florida, when I went through my initial training, then I went to Albuquerque, New Mexico for 9 months to get trained on the MC-130J. For about 2 months of that, Kayla went up to Missouri and sold my childhood home. So the house I grew up in with my sister and my mom passed, then I owned it. My sister wasn't living anymore. I'm like, we need to do something with this house. I'm about to move to England. Let's sell this thing. And the house needed a bunch of cleaning. It needed a bunch of work. And Kayla handled that for me. I was in training. I couldn't go up to Missouri and do any of this. And I asked her if she'd be willing to. She's like, yeah. And she did it. She sold a house and took care of all of my shit. That was awesome. Never once complained about it, right? She took a sacrifice and did that, opposed to spending time with her family before we moved to England across the ocean and did those type of things. And then when I was going to WIC, I was TDY there, so I was stationed there, didn't have a home, right? And I lived in a long-term hotel for 6 months. And before going to that, I made it very clear, I'm gonna go through WIC. You can take those 6 months and do whatever you want. We're gonna be in the States. You can go spend time with family. You can be there with me if you want. You can do whatever you want. I don't care. It's just understand this will take all my time. If you're there with me, you may not I'll be gone before you wake up and may not get home till after you're asleep, and the same the next day. Those type of things. And she was awesome through it. She was incredibly supportive. She spent 2 months with me there or here in Florida, and then would see family at different points. Incredibly supportive. It was awesome. Then I get to Cannon. I have a deployment, do the thing, blah, blah, blah. And then the difference between this and those times, in my opinion, hindsight being what it is, those times I was deliberately entering a new phase of my life and career. And I had to conversations with Kayla about how that was going to look and the expectations. This was just I came back from deployment. I was assistant flight commander. And just one day I became a flight commander, sit in the same office, all that kind of stuff. And it wasn't I sat Kayla down and was hey, I'm going to take this flight commander role. And also when I took this flight commander role, I didn't completely understand how much busier I'd be, or that it would end in me deploying as an ESOS commander, or the opportunities I would get because of that role and danger and all those things. So it wasn't I went to her and hey, for the next year and a half, I'm going to make some sacrifices, or I'm going to ask you to make some sacrifices to deal with my work-life balance and those type of things. That didn't happen. It's just we woke up one day and I all of a sudden was on my phone all the time. just those type of things. This was also in the middle of COVID, so the people that were here in Florida didn't experience, I don't think, but New Mexico and at Cannon, COVID just added twice as much work to fucking everything for what seemed to be no reason. And so like it just required a bunch more time. Anytime someone wanted had to take leave, it was like a 10-step process opposed to like we had to fill out 4 different forms opposed to just going into leave and accepting it. So just like all that took more time and all those type of things. So it was just like all of a sudden one day our balance in our life changed without any warning. And then I was just like so dived into work that I felt like I owed my subordinates. This is the first time I really had subordinates that like I wrote their paperwork for their like promotions and I wrote their awards and I did those type of things that I felt a lot of like onus to make sure those were really good to give them those opportunities to make rank, get paid more money, get different opportunities. So I felt like I owed a lot to them. And so like I wasn't always willing to be like, yeah, I'm not, this is just our time. And we just didn't set up good boundaries. I think if I had done that, set better boundaries, and like communicate with Kayla, even like at the beginning, once I realized what was going on, it was kind of like we just went day by day and we're like figuring it out as we went along, opposed to us getting to the point where I should have been like, hey, something's changed and like something's not quite working for us. Let's sit down. Let's like make a game plan for what the next X amount of time is going to look like and what's sustainable for us and sustainable for like me and my job.
Have you ever heard of the boiling frog analogy?
Uh, yes. I don't remember it completely.
Yeah, so I'm going to absolutely butcher this.
For it.
So Bilotti, you know, the episode X, which if you're listening or viewing this, absolutely go check that out. Bilotti is such a good dude. One of my like super close friends. So after I graduated from WIC, I was selected to go back and teach. And then about 2 years into teaching, I felt like my life was just absolutely like collapsed. And I couldn't understand where it fell off the rails. And I had continuously like it was pretty consistent messaging for me that I was like, I feel like I'm getting more and more stressed and I'm unable to like hold all these oranges in my hand. You know, I was like, I feel like everything's just like falling apart. And my buddy Bilotti sat me down and asked me, he was like, you know, he asked me the same question, have you ever heard the boiling frog analogy? So to finally explain the analogy, so some cultures, they eat frogs, not me. But when you cook a frog, so if you have boiling water, you drop a frog in the frog is going to jump out theoretically because the water is boiling hot, right? Now, to effectively cook a frog, I guess, you drop the frog in the water and then you slowly turn up the temperature until the frog is edible and cooked, right? Now, when he explained that to me, I took a moment to look at the last 4 years of my life, where when I was at my deployable squadron, you know, as you know, the life, like we were deploying all the time. And then I got to WIC, and it was like the slow progression of life stressors up until the point where I had hit my cap, but I didn't know that I was at my cap because it was such a slow, gradual increase in stress. And it sounds like that was what happened to you guys. Now that you have experienced that, has that given you any tools? So obviously we'll continue the story of like the ESOL stuff, but like has it given you any tools once you got to that point where you realize like, hey, we're both super stressed out and I haven't even left for the deployment yet? Like what was that like?
Yeah. And to clarify through the whole story, we also left for I think it was a month and a half to close down Kabul, and then for like another several months to close down Bagram in that year leading up to that 5 month deployment. So there's a lot of gone, and like that puts strain on communication and everything else. Things I've learned is like we just need to communicate better and like identify when we need to do that, right? As you get more and more things in your life, it's easy to get like lost in the sauce, if you will. But it's like at those times to be like, oh wait, we're not treating each other like we were a year ago. What's changed? Or like we're in this different dynamic, and then like taking that pause and be like, we need to figure this out, take time, figure out, and then like make a plan. Because like Kayla had proven to me that she's willing to make sacrifices for me and my career and those type of things. Like that wasn't a problem. It wasn't a problem that Kayla wasn't unwilling for me to like be at work or those type of things. But it was probably the first time in my career where I wasn't communicating like simple things of like when I would be home, right? It would just be like, hey, I don't know when I'm gonna be home, or I'd text her be like, hey, I think I'll be home at 6, and that would end up home at 8, and that just caused like a lot of frustration and those type of things, right? And it wasn't like we figured out like a way to approach that. We just kind of brunt force through it, where she just learned to like not rely on what I was saying on any timeline, which turns out isn't awesome for like our relationship and our marriage and all that type of stuff. So, um, like figuring out that problem and communicating, and then just setting the boundaries, right? Of whatever's acceptable to us. Like the boundary could have been like Monday through Saturday, you work any and all hours and I won't trust your time, but Sunday's our time and we need Sunday. Or it could be, I need you home by like 7 on nights you're not flying. And if that's not attainable, like I need to know as soon as possible, whatever it is. Um, and I think Kayla would have been like amenable to any of those things. But in reality, what happened is I just left Kayla hanging all the time about like anything. And then it also didn't help on those deployments that it was like, hey, I'm deploying, don't know when I'll be back. And I would get there. And of course, it's like, when you get back, it's like, no fucking clue. And that just shrink along, right? And on those deployments, in reality, like we had a lot more time than I did back home, just because it's like a lot of hurry up and wait and those type of things. And I essentially just leave Kayla behind and be like, hope you have fun with the dogs and take care of our RV, you know. Yeah, so it's just better communication and better boundaries on like how we're gonna tackle this problem together as a couple. Because essentially we just went into it and like I was handling it my way and she was handling it her way, opposed to us being setting up like our plan for it together as a couple.
100%. In my opinion, that's phenomenal advice, dude. I think there's an epidemic with work life balance. Pistol and I talked about this very briefly in his episode, but it seems like more and more people are just like super frantic right now. Like they don't really know what they want out of their lives, but you work hard at work, theoretically that pays off at some point. And so a lot of people are kind of prioritizing without meaning to do so. They're prioritizing their work over their life, which is then causing this cascading effect of things. I'm curious on your thoughts on that, and if you've seen the same thing that I've personally been seeing.
Yeah, I've seen it. So I'm in a unit right now where it's generally a lot of FGOs, a lot of like high time instructors that are 10 plus years into their career, generally either about to start a family, I've already started a family, so a different environment than when I'm in the ops unit. I mean, airmen that are 19 years old all the way to like 40-year-olds and a big mix in between, right? So I have a more centralized right now, what I'll say, demographic of like the people I'm around. So I probably see it in different ways right now because, as you know, by working there, it's busy. It's a grind. It's a different type of grind than being the operational unit where you deploy, but like a lot of long hours, and a lot of sacrifice, right? I don't see it so much from our unit because we have a bunch of what I would call high performers that like take pride in their work and also are at the point of their career where they're like willing to say no to things, which is huge. Like saying no to things is like a skill learned for a lot of people. And so like most of the people I work with have like learned that skill and are willing to do that if they need to. Where in the operational units, and I can only speak to what I see in AFSOC and those type of things. But yeah, man, like they're overtasked and a lot of them think the tasks they're getting honestly aren't worth their time. Not necessarily their time, but like just silly stuff that they didn't train for years to do these things. And then to be so busy not doing the thing. Which part of that's just like humbling yourself to realize like, war ebbs and flows. We couldn't always keep Afghanistan and that kind of stuff.
I was gonna say, do you have examples of that?
Yeah. So it used to be like, for the MC-130J, we had Afghanistan. That was our playground. There was always a deployment there. Someone's always in that rotation, and you would go there. You would do the thing, right? You'd work with the users. You do all the stuff. And we also did like other stuff, and it was reporting and that kind of stuff. And now it's a lot of different type of things. But AFSOC has focused on flying hours, and flying more hours is more important than quality flying. And so units are forced to do, in my opinion, silly things. Fly at high level. High level to us is like how airlines fly for like 3 hours out and 3 hours back. That is just like shit training, but crews need hours. And it's just like, what are we doing? So I feel like we're missing the mark a lot. And for anyone keeping up with the Air Force, I think the Air Force is missing the mark. Like recently, they've come out and said we're removing a bunch of family days or safety days. And for those not familiar with the Air Force, generally around a federal holiday, if a federal holiday is on a Monday and everyone has off work, that Friday before, the command will give that day off work. So you essentially have a 4-day weekend. They happen about once every 2 months, based on different holidays. And that was just like a way to give back to the troops. I think we're missing the mark there. Mostly for like, I'll give examples. Like that year, I was deployed 8 months out of the year sporadically. I don't think like the one extra day I was back at work when I was home was going to be the difference. You know what I mean? That being said, so I don't think that's the fix. Do I 100% agree like we're losing some like basic discipline and like some basic thing in the Air Force? Yeah, and we need to fix that. I'm just not sure this is the solution.
Yeah.
I don't think our airmen are going to stop being fat because you made them show up to work one more day a month.
I completely agree. Have you ever been like interviewed, not necessarily like within the podcast capacity, but like have you ever been interviewed outside of like for a job, I guess, in the Air Force?
Oh, I've been interviewed for it. No, actually, I haven't. I've gotten close to going to do interviews and that kind of stuff. And they were turned off. No, I mean the closest experience I've had to what I would call interviewing, which is essentially WIC, like when we do approval briefs.
Mm,
You are essentially interviewing to get approval, right? Like you were spending an hour to explain your thing for someone else to say yes. And to me, that's essentially what that is.
yeah.
Especially in the military, like you're briefing a general who you've never met before. At the best, you've got their bio and you're like, okay, they have this background and this job. They're probably going to care about these things. And you spend the next hour and a half convincing them that your plan is good to go and they're going to approve it. And like, they're going to approve your plan that could get people killed, right? So like to me, I don't know how to better prepare to communicate than that because you've got to learn it.
Yeah. So you were saying that communication prior to deployment and while you were on the deployment was a struggle. What are some ways that you fucked that up?
So with that part in my world, or like how I view things, I'm very deliberate with the words I use. So when I say I think I'll be home by 6, that's not like I will be home by 6. That's I think I will be. And so like there's some ambiguity there. So I'm not like because I believe that's true at the time. But that doesn't necessarily matter. And so like I would mess up because I think you brought up earlier that being on time is very important to you. Like it's also very important to me, and it also annoys Kayla. Like when we go see friends and stuff, like I hate not being on time. That largely comes from watching my dad be late to everything growing up, and like it's about a respect thing. Like if you set a time, I'm gonna be there because I respect you enough to be there when I said, that type of deal. That being said, I'm sure it was very difficult for Kayla to know that like I'm big about being on time to things, to then like never do that with her, right? Like I was respecting everyone else by making sure I was there on time to like for whatever meeting or whatever work I had, and then I wasn't respecting her by like being on time for her. And so in my mind, I was communicating correctly. I was like, I told you I think I would. Like I didn't say I was going to be, or like for sure, but like that didn't matter. There's more to just communication, the words you use. And like that's one of the things I messed up. Another thing I would mess up, it would be like when I was ready to communicate, I like expected or like almost forced her to communicate with me. For instance, while I was on the deployment as the ESOS commander, I had a pretty like rhythm, if you will, for my job. It was after Afghanistan closed down. The Middle East was still trying to figure out what it was doing, and honestly, we weren't the busiest I've ever been on deployments. So generally speaking, the end of my day was breakfast over there. And where I worked to where I lived was a drive, so I would, 10-minute drive or whatever. So I would call Kayla, I would talk to her for 5 minutes, and then I would get off the phone while I got my to-go breakfast, and I would call her again on my drive to my like bed, and then talk to her while I was eating breakfast. And she didn't love that. How timelines worked out, generally speaking, that was the evening for her. So she was like going to bed or whatever, and I was just like, I can talk now, let's talk. And she would tell me, she was like, I don't want you to just call me and then to like hang up 3 minutes later. And I'd be like, what? That's the time I had to talk. Like, let's talk. And like that would frustrate her, and I wasn't really respecting that of being like, in my mind, I was like, this is the only time I have to speak with you, like, got to, you know me, opposed to her being like, why don't you just call me when you're back at your, like in your room and eating breakfast, and we'll just talk to that. In my mind, I'm like, well, that's half the time. And but her, that was like deliberate time where I wasn't like driving or like distracted or anything else, and I could just like be there with her. So part of it is just like hearing her and like respecting that, because I was trying to communicate the way I want to communicate, opposed to like again sitting down having the discussion of like, here's how we're gonna handle this situation with us. And just because the hindsight behind it is way too long for me to like figure that out and do all those things. Because I was worried about a bunch of different stuff, right? And communication across the world, even with FaceTime and that kind of stuff, isn't always the easiest. And again, it would be like the whole thing where I'm like, yep, I'll probably call you at whatever time, and then something would happen, and I'd still be at work or whatever else, you know. Other things that me and Kayla do, like we would assume we know what the other person means, or like what their intent is. I think it's really important to not assume other people's intent unless they tell you what it is. And then if you have questions, just ask. I think you meant this. Is that true? Like, oh no, I didn't at all. So I think that's important, just as like couples grow as people, to stop making assumptions, especially as you get more and more like Kayla knows me really well, and I know Kayla really well, but I can't read her mind, and she can't read mine. So just because we feel comfortable, we think we know someone really well, doesn't mean we should just make assumptions about what they mean all the time. We can still use our words to communicate. I think those are the big things that like I messed up.
Yeah, and I have a quote from you here where it says, happiness is a choice. You can control your feelings.
Yeah.
How did these beliefs help you and your now growing family recover from the deployment in the following years? Because it's not as if you come back from the deployment and then communication fixes itself for the rest of your relationship, right? So what does that
Yeah.
quote mean? Or excuse me, what does that quote mean to you now?
Yeah, it means to me like, I mean, simply every experience you go through, like whether you are happy or not, ultimately falls on you. I'm not going to say it's going to be easy to be happy all the time. There are times where like you're going to go through something and it'll be like unrealistic for you to be happy, but it's still an option because you control your feelings. No one else does. When people say things like they made me feel a certain way, I'm just like, no, they didn't. You felt a certain way based on their actions, and you chose to feel that way. If people couldn't control their emotions, they wouldn't go to therapy. That's literally what therapy is designed to do, is to help you control your emotions and process information, right? Um, so for me, it is looking back, partially because I kind of have this view, like whatever, shit sandwich I'm given, I'm like, well, here's where we're at, and like go forward, right? But there was probably, because I was handling it that way, doesn't mean I should just expect Kayla to the whole time, right? Additionally, afterwards, we got back from deployment, or I got back from deployment, and then 2.5 months later, we PCS to Florida. And so a lot of churn there and all the different things. Then we moved in here, and we didn't have our own house for several months and that kind of stuff. And Kayla's awesome about being happy. There were a lot of those like really crappy situations where I have no doubt a lot of spouses and dependents would just like absolutely complain about all the situations I put Kayla in if they were in that situation. That's partly why I didn't marry them, and partly why I love Kayla, because she, generally speaking, will like look at the brighter side of things and be happy through those experiences. And I see a lot of people, especially in the Air Force now, like they're just choosing to be sad or disappointed or whatever with the situation they're in, but then like not choosing to be happy and also not doing anything to change it. So, like currently in my life, when we talk about my priorities between my family and the Air Force, if in 5 years I end up somewhere and I'm not happy about it, that's my own fault. I made choices to get to that point. Some things were probably out of my control, but it doesn't matter at that point. I'm going to be happy and I'm going to like excel at what I'm doing and then keep working to make my life better.
Yeah, man, I appreciate that. So for our listeners, whether it's a demanding job, starting business, or any season of their life that's pulling them away from their family, what would you say one communication strategy that they could implement today be?
Over communicate, period. Most people think they communicate so well when in reality they just don't. A lot of people think they communicated something and like everyone understood it. A classic example I would give of in a group of 30 people, like if I tell them like, hey everyone, the sky is blue, one person would be like, you said green, right? I'd be like, no, blue. And they're like, I think I heard green. And they would walk away with green. You're like, what the hell? So like if you're communicating to a mass of people, I promise you not all of them understood. And if you communicate to like an individual, it almost never hurts to like clarify communication. In my work, I almost always follow up with an email or an instant message to like get it somewhere to where it's captured. With Kayla, I will like approach the conversation 3 times to make sure we're on the same page or to clarify any things. I'm sure Kayla doesn't always appreciate it because she's like, we've already talked about this. But I would much prefer us be like on the same page about how we're going to replace the fence at our house or how that's going to go versus like we get into it and she's like, well, I told him to do this. I'll be like, that's not what I meant. That type of stuff. So like, I don't think it's bad to over communicate. And then once you kind of feel your groove, you can back off some if you need to. But most people don't communicate effectively. And just the first way to do that is start to do it more and then figure out like your sweet spot.
That's excellent advice, dude. That is like truly excellent advice. Okay, so 2 final questions for you. You ready?
Yeah.
Biggest life regrets?
My biggest life regrets. So my mom had ALS. It's funny how like life works out, man. I was in Boy Scouts, and at my Eagle Scout ceremony, where they're like, I've done all the things, and they're gonna make me an Eagle Scout. I was 15 or 16 at the time, and my dad drove up from South Carolina or Atlanta, where we lived at the time, and my mom's there and all the things. And part of that like process, kind of similar to the military, is like when they give you it, just like when people get new rank in the military, they come up and pin it on. It's like a similar type of thing. So, I'm up there as a kid in my little uniform, and my mom walks up, and at that time, she had like started to develop a limp in her right leg, and like her right leg would like stay almost stiff as she walked, and it like kind of gave her like this weird gant, and that just like was a recent thing, like almost as if you and me were like, man, I tweaked my back or leg or something, and you're just like still trying to get over it, and it's been like a month or two. And I was doing that in conjunction with the Stanleys, or with another guy that was getting his Eagle Scout Corner of Honor, and one of their friends that was there to watch them was a neurologist. And then after the ceremony, the neurologist comes up to my mom and was like, hey, I think you need to go see a neurologist, like just based on how she walked. And then that started the process where went to a neurologist. A month later, we find out that my mom has ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease, which some people more commonly know. Remember the Ice Bucket Challenge from like 2015?
Mm-hmm.
That was for ALS. Not sure how that helped, but it was a thing. But she had ALS, and for anyone that doesn't know what it is, basically it stops your inability for your brain to communicate to the rest of your body. So she slowly lost like function of her body, and eventually you lose function to be able to communicate to your lungs to tell them to breathe and your heart to be able to tell it to beat, right? So eventually kills you. It's a terminal illness. It generally takes, I think at the time they told us 2 to 5 years is like the expected time frame. My mom was 46 when she was diagnosed, I think. I have to go back and do the math. But a lot of that, like, that was my junior year. And then she passed that was my senior year, and she passed the summer after my sophomore year in college. That had a big effect on me, right? Just how I view the world and different things. And at one point early on, if I remember right, it was between my freshman year and sophomore year to college. At this point, my mom couldn't really move around on her own. My sister is 1 year behind me in school, so while I was in my freshman year of college, my sister was in her senior year of high school and was there with my mom to like take care of her, basically, right? She like progressed over that year to get worse and worse. I think at the beginning of the year she had to have like a walker to walk around, and by the next summer, like she couldn't really walk with a walker anymore, stuff like that. Like she couldn't eat without someone putting something in her hand so she could like grab it like a crab and then like hold on to it because she couldn't really control her fingers and stuff like that. And we were having a conversation about my sister was going to go off to college. How are we going to do that? My mom was sacrificed a lot throughout her whole life for us, and like was continued to be like, no, you're going to college. Like you have the opportunity. You're not going to stay home and watch me. That type of deal. And she was trying to figure out a way to get out of this situation. And at one point she asked me if I could help her overdose, basically. And at the time, I was 19, I think. And when she asked me, I could picture the scene and everything. When she asked me, I was just like, Mom, I can't do that. Like I couldn't give it any thought other than like, there's no way I can do that. And I told her that. She cried, all the things. And then I convinced my mom she needs to go into a nursing home while we're off in college. And she spent the next year in a nursing home basically until she passed the next summer, which was very demoralizing for her. She's in a nursing home with a bunch of 80-plus-year-olds. At one point, my grandfather, her father, was in the nursing home with her, different things like that. Biggest regret there was like not being able to help my mom. That doesn't necessarily mean like herself kill herself, but like basically I was like, I can't do anything for you.
Yeah.
Right. And backed off. So granted, I get it. I was 19, like it's like super realistic to think I can navigate how my dying mother is handling her life, right? But I don't know. I regret at least not like entertaining the possibility or figuring out a way to like help her in some other way than just like putting her in a nursing home. It was what it was. She went to the nursing home. Again, life is funny. My ex-girlfriend's mom, Miss Flint, who to this day had a huge impact on my life, would like come see my mom in the nursing home and like brought her close to God and go back and call it. I'd see her every weekend in college and that kind of stuff, right? So it all worked out. But that's just something that like I don't know, sucked, and I wish I could have handled it at least in a better way to help my mom. Other than that, I don't have a lot of regrets. Been pretty like deliberate in my life about the choices I've made and like where I am. So I don't really have a lot of regrets on like whether I joined the Air Force, what degree I got, or any of that kind of stuff.
Thanks for sharing that, man. Dude, that almost that almost got me like emotional, dude. That's obviously we talked about that on Wednesday, but I just genuinely appreciate you like sharing that moment. I think it says a lot about fear and how fear restricts us from just really any kind of action, because there's not a lot that you could have done in that situation, and I know that too. But to your point, the initial reaction to just be like, I don't know how to help you. Like, I don't know what to do. I'm just gonna go like live my own life, and hopefully you'll be good, like kind of thing. And so yeah, that's super sad, man. I appreciate you sharing that.
No, it's all good, man. And like, it's just an experience I had in my life that I have no doubt that like formed part of my lack of empathy and like the way I view the world and like interact with the world. But love my mom, and she made great sacrifices for us and all that kind of stuff. And it was a shitty situation, but turns out a lot of people have shitty situations they have to deal with. So that was just mine.
Yeah. Well, the final question I had for you is, what's next? Now you got this awesome new growing family. You got your son, who's I get to live through your guys' life through Kayla's Instagram, which is awesome. So, yeah, what's next for you, man?
The Air Force will have a certain say in like how my day to day looks. I'm gonna work real hard to make sure like how my year to year looks. It's gonna be like my goals. So I'm up for my third look now. This fall, I'll figure out if I end up doing that, going to school, that kind of track, or if I end up not, then figuring out where else I'll go in the world. Most likely, I'll end up at some Air Force base, probably in the United States, and I'll leave next summer for my next PCS or move. And then don't know where I'm going, that kind of stuff. But like my goals there is, so Kentucky's 5 weeks old now. He'll be just over a year next summer. And during that, my next assignment is where I view him going from like 1 to 5 roughly. And in those years, there's like a lot of formative years. I'm going to do my damnedest to like get him around my dad. My dad has like a little homestead farm up in Missouri, and just like get him those memories of just like being with his grandpa and working to plant seeds or the cattle or like whatever else. And the same thing with Kayla's family, and like make those years of his just like fucking awesome. There's always not going to be the opportunity to do all that kind of stuff all the time, but just like be very deliberate of how we choose to spend our time and what we choose to do it with. And then who knows after that. Mostly I'm figuring out like what that work-life balance is going to be with my new kid, with my wife, her business, all that type of stuff. And we're almost just waiting for what the options are, which hopefully we'll find out here in about 9 months. But wherever we are, we're going to try to make sure certain things happen. So just really looking forward to it, man. And that's awesome. I don't know how anyone else would be like, yeah, this sucks. Just doesn't make sense to me because now I get to like have a little dude that wants to do all the things with me, and that's just gonna be fucking awesome.
Yeah, that's gonna be super cool. Can I plug Kayla's like Instagram? Like, I don't know.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, that's the thing. I wouldn't even know what to say, but there are some females that do listen to this, and if I could use it as an opportunity, just because I like believe in what Kayla does, I will ask you this question: be like, you mentioned your wife's business. What does she do?
Yeah. So part of like us figuring out what things are gonna look like in the next 5 years is like taking into account my wife's business. She's a personal trainer. You can find her on Instagram, Kayla M Puckett. That's just her handle. She works with a bunch of women, and that's her job. And it's awesome because she gets to do something she loves, which fitness is a big part of our life, mine and hers. And now she gets to
As you can
basically
tell,
help
he's
other
on a
people.
walking pad right now.
Yeah. And then she gets to help other people while also providing for our family and doing that kind of stuff. And figure out what that balance looks like now we have a kid. And for the first 5 years, Kayla works from home, so she's going to be watching Kentucky. Like, what is that balance? Like, what is reasonable for us to expect on her business and all that kind of stuff? What's been awesome is like she's back to work now and loving it. And it's just a great opportunity that we are living in a time where my wife can stay home with my kid and have like a job that contributes to our family and have that balance, and she gets the fulfillment from that and our kid and all the things, right? And so that'll just be something that like I mean, and this is a recent thing. She's basically developed this business over the past 2.5 years, and before that she didn't have it. So it's like a new balance in our life as we figure out like where we put our time and effort into different things. So just a lot of changes, and just super looking forward to it.
Yeah, man. You got anything else?
Don't be a bitch. Don't be a victim. I think those are the big things. Don't suck.
You say don't suck? Was that the last thing you said?
Just don't suck.
Yeah.
And if you're gonna suck at it, just don't do it. Unless your goal is to get better and stop sucking, don't just like do something and suck at it. Like either become a master at it or just like give it up and move on to the next thing. For instance, I suck at spelling. I don't spend time spelling. Don't. It's also awesome that we live in a time of Grammarly and like Word documents that tell me I'm spelling shitty, but like I'm not wasting my time on that because the amount of time I would have to put into it to become like a master at it would be an outrageous amount of time where I can spend time doing other things to be good at those things and like help my society, help my country, and help my family. In that opposite order.
Fuck the notes. Dude, genuinely, thank you, man. Like this, first off, thank you for coming on the podcast and just like sharing your story. Before that, I guess you could say thanks again. I know I've already said this a bunch of times, but like it's been an absolute blessing, man. Just like meeting you a couple of years ago, just like getting to know you, getting like super close, like, you know, Jamie meeting Kayla, me meeting Kayla, like it's just been awesome, man. It's super great to like have you guys in our lives too. So, like I've said before, Jamie loves Kayla, dude, and I love hanging out with you guys. So it's just been awesome, bro.
Dude, it's been for anyone thinking about the military, this is one of the things you get from it. Like, there's no other scenario I know of where I can meet Norman, who I know is Rufio, that's a guy from Detroit, I think. Well, I came from Missouri, twice from Vegas. Like, you get such a network of friends that are just from like such diverse backgrounds and like different experiences that like you learn so much to just like have a true appreciation about like different parts of the world, right? Growing up, just like small town, that kind of stuff, like I had a much more narrow view of the world. And so like the things I've learned and like the people I've learned or met and like grown friends with, people that I may not talk for years and then I'll just hit them up and we pick up where we left off, is just absolutely amazing. And like, dude, you are one of those for me, for sure. It's truly awesome to see you grow. I mean, when I met you, you were just like some instructor at the 14th with me, and now you're going on to be an officer all the things, right? You're working on your PhD. Like, it's just awesome to see you grow. And I hope to continue to see you grow the rest of my life, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to end the episode.